Hi there, everyone. It's Paul Manna here with Democracy in 5 Minutes. Thanks for joining me. In today's episode, I want to discuss habeas corpus, which is an important constitutional and legal concept receiving much attention in the news these days. It's likely that the idea will continue to percolate in the coming weeks and months, which is why I'd like to get into it now so you can better track these future discussions as events unfold. By the end of today's episode, I hope you'll understand what habeas corpus is, why it's a foundational building block for democratic societies, and why recent statements from Trump administration officials have raised serious concerns about it. That's the plan. So let's start by defining what habeas corpus is. It's a Latin term, and translated literally, it means you should have the body. You should have the body. The U.S. Constitution uses the term in Article 1, which describes Congress and its powers. This is the only part of the Constitution where the idea appears. The relevant passage is in Section 9 of Article 1 and says this: "The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion the public safety may require it." As you can see, that language in the Constitution refers to something called a writ of habeas corpus. That's a legal instrument that resides at the heart of the American judicial system and also the judicial systems of democracies around the world. A writ of habeas corpus is an order from a court that requires law enforcement authorities to do two things. First, it requires them to bring forth a prisoner in their custody. That gets at the literal meaning of the term, you should have the body. That's the idea that the government can't just disappear people. The government has to produce their living, breathing body to the court when judges demand it. Second, it requires the government to provide a legal argument and evidence to justify continuing to hold a person in their custody. The idea here is that the government can't just keep people locked up, depriving them of their liberty, without having a persuasive reason. Hopefully you can see why such a protection is so important for democratic societies to thrive. One way you can tell this idea is so fundamental is that the U.S. Constitution notes only two scenarios for suspending habeas corpus. They are the extreme cases of the country facing a domestic rebellion or facing an invasion from an external force. And even then, Congress would still have to vote for that suspension of habeas corpus to occur. With those ideas in mind, let's look at why many people are so concerned about some of the Trump administration's recent positions on habeas corpus. Two examples stand out. The first comes from a Senate hearing earlier this week when Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was asked, "What is habeas corpus?" In response, here's what she said: "Habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country." Senator Maggie Hassan, who asked the question, was taken aback and interrupted Noem at that point. The reason is because Noem's definition stated habeas corpus was a right the president had rather than a right of the people. Noem's answer also wrongfully implied that the Constitution says something about a president's power over habeas corpus determinations. Noem's answer was especially worrisome because as leader of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, she oversees government agencies like Immigration and Customs Enforcement that routinely apprehend and detain people. The second example is from earlier this month in a statement that Stephen Miller made to reporters outside the White House. Miller, recall, is one of President Trump's top advisors. In his statement, Miller did correctly note that the Constitution says that habeas corpus could be suspended in time of invasion. What raised much attention was his subsequent comment that noted, "That's an option we are actively looking at." And he went on to say, "A lot of it depends on whether the courts do the right thing or not." That point about suspending habeas corpus being an option the White House is considering echoes Noem's error by implying that presidents can unilaterally suspend habeas corpus. Remember, they can't do that. Further, Miller's comment about the courts needing to do the right thing made people wonder if Trump's administration would fail to honor a writ of habeas corpus if the courts presented them with one. Now, think about the hugely important implications of Noem and Miller's comments for a moment. Following their theory to its conclusion would create a chilling scenario for anyone who loves democracy. It would mean that presidents could suspend habeas corpus and hold any person indefinitely without producing their live body or any charges against them, and further that the courts and Congress would be powerless to do anything about it. So, what would I suggest you do with this important information? First, use it as a foundation as you continue to pay attention to assertions about habeas corpus from elected officials and from other people who question the assertions from those folks. Try not to simply ignore these discussions because habeas corpus sounds like some obscure bit of legal jargon. It's actually a core principle that is fundamental in democratic societies. Second, don't hesitate to pose queries to your own representatives about habeas corpus if you have concerns or questions about it. Sometimes people worry that they will sound dumb or uninformed when they bring up what seem like fancy legal terms. The language might seem fancy, but remember the core idea of habeas corpus and the way the Constitution treats it is relatively straightforward. So don't let others ignore your concerns by saying you don't know what you're talking about when you actually do. That's where I'd like to wrap up today's episode. With luck, our discussion today helps clarify why habeas corpus is such a core building block for life in democracies. We'll continue with some new ideas next week, and until we meet again, take good care, folks. I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.